It's Tuesday, June 7th, and for the first time in nearly 12 years, EF5 tornadoes are back. This beast right here, which occurred on June 20th, earlier this year, was upgraded from a EF3 to a EF5 tornado yesterday. And this is actually not just a regular EF5 tornado, this is tied for the strongest rating from the EF scale ever with the 2011 El Reno tornado. Now, this is kind of wild because this isn't actually just something that is kind of seen from the normal EF scale damage indicators. They've actually done something which we don't normally see, is that they've used some forensic analysis. Right here, this train car is what has kind of been the reason for that EF5 rating. This was thrown anywhere between 600 to 1,000 feet away from where it lay before the tornado impacted, and this weighs nearly 300,000 pounds. So pretty wild and definitely very deserving of that EF5 rating. Now, scrolling back up here, let's take a deeper look at the Enderlin EF5. So obviously, now a EF5 tornado at its peak right about here, kind of near where that EF5 damage indicator occurred. It was roughly a little bit more than a mile wide, and then it also had a pretty long track length of 12 miles, where we can see it occluded right up here near the end of its life. Now, it is important to note that this did have some real world impacts on some people. It did unfortunately cause 3 deaths. So it's also to show that this did actually impact people, and that although it is an EF5 and it is cool to see this rating, we did have some unfortunate things occur. But moving back to some of our pictures of the damage, this tornado was definitely not the one that we expected to break this drought. As we can see, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, really, in around the middle of North Dakota, and kind of what it seemed like, going off the trends from the NWS and their ratings of tornadoes, it seemed like we really were not going to see another EF5 tornado unless it impacted a very urban area, which we definitely did not want to see, and that's kind of why we didn't want to see an EF5 tornado at all. But this is actually probably the best case scenario for a EF5 indicator. While this occurred, not really anything was harmed other than the train, and it's really cool to see an indicator like this, which we don't normally see at all. Really, the only other one that comes to mind is the 2 million pound oil rig being rolled, and that gaining a EF5 damage indicator from the 2011 El Reno tornado, which this one shares a equal wind speed rating with. And taking a deeper look, this is what it looked like on radar at the time when it was actually impacting pretty much at the exact spot where we saw that EF5 indicator. We see that very defined hook, really solid storm structure. And then also over here, I want to point out that we had a VROT of roughly 107 knots. That's very, very high. That's one of the highest VROTs that we've had all year this year, and definitely kind of showing that even the radar indicated wind speeds were showing that this could potentially be a EF5 tornado, and then also a very deep debris ball as well. And then taking a look on the damage assessment toolkit, it's almost surreal to see that purple EF5 color, especially from a new tornado. This is so rare that I almost thought it was fake the first time I saw it, but it's definitely very, very real. Here it's on the damage assessment toolkit, and zooming in, these are the EF5 damage indicators, again, being from those train cars. And taking a deeper look here, like I said, these train cars were almost 300,000 pounds, and then multiple other ones that were around 75,000 pounds were also rolled over. And then also it was thrown that distance of around 600 to 1,000 feet, and then another 500 feet roughly from where it was ripped apart from the other train cars that it was kind of attached with. Now, this is kind of in conjunction with a study that was performed earlier, which showed that something at about half the distance thrown and then 4 times lighter could be an indicator of EF5 wind speeds. And then in doing this, the NWS actually calculated that the maximum possible wind speeds in this were around 230 miles an hour. And then some other study groups predicted that we could have actually seen 260 mile an hour winds to accomplish this feat from some engineering equations. Now, of course, this isn't the only indicator of a strong tornado. We do have a couple of EF4 indicators up here. There was one house that was slabbed entirely, which received a 180-mile-an-hour wind speed rating, and then the house just off to the west, very close actually, received another EF4 rating, 170 mile an hour, that one. Now, the reason these did not receive a higher rating was because of the construction in these homes would just not support a higher rating, but these homes were completely slabbed and destroyed. So that's kind of the highest rating that they could have received wind speed wise. But going back to the first page we were on, it is kind of crazy that 12-year drought has officially come to an end, and this is the way it has kind of come to. Maybe this is kind of ushering in a new way that tornadoes will be rated, because this is definitely something that we're not used to be seeing. Once this tornado occurred, it was definitely a EF5 contender. We just didn't really think it would receive that rating based off of trends from the NWS in past ratings. But another thing to note is that all of these pictures from here, I have linked the people that took them in the description. All of them do amazing other work. So Alex Fressel, Brian Emfinger, and then also Aaron Rigsby. But there is also some actual severe weather that is expected today on top of this historical thing that just occurred. We do have a very small marginal risk down here in the far western parts of New Mexico. Definitely a couple of supercells, potentially discrete in nature, could fire off there. Then we have a tongue which kind of stretches up into northern parts of Oklahoma, the Texas Panhandle, and then quite a bit of Kansas where we could see some thunderstorms, maybe even being strong. And then this big corridor kind of stretching up the entire Mississippi River Valley, even back into the northeast and parts of the Midwest as well, kind of like Ohio area. We could see a big line of thunderstorms in this potentially being strong along some frontal activity as well. But moving back to our main area that's bringing concern, our marginal risk area in western New Mexico, it's mostly going to be for a hail threat. Actually, there's not even a wind threat associated with this. I think we could potentially see some large hail, maybe even being in that 1.5 to 2 inch realm. And then for winds, I think we could see some damaging wind gusts, although that's not really the primary concern with this. But whenever we do see those stronger supercells, that's always a possibility with them. And then for the tornado risk, it's going to be essentially zero with those. And here's where I want you to look for. You're going to see a line of supercells fire off. This is going to be in western New Mexico around the mid to early afternoon hours. We see a cluster of potentially some discrete cells. That's actually one of the reasons why the hail threat could be a bit bigger, be fired off along a area of convergence with a trough. There's even expected to be a bit of a low pressure system and also a stationary front hanging around. And then that stationary front will kind of sag down and then turn into a cold front as it stretches back up. And then we'll bring some more weather to our Mississippi River, Northeast and Midwest risk area as well. But in this main risk area, it looks like we're going to have a cluster of supercells today, definitely bringing that threat for some potentially large hail. Pretty short-lived though, dying off before the late afternoon and sunset hours take place. And moving a bit more back eastward, where we're going to have that big line of thunderstorms along that cold front, maybe a couple of embedded low pressure systems within this, maybe bringing some stronger areas, but it's mostly going to be kind of with this cold front. And then also we have a big trough with a lot of jet stream and forcing behind it. That's kind of why we're seeing a lot of these messy storms up here, especially that's where our jet stream is kind of maximizing in strength, but stretching all the way down into parts of Alabama even. We could see some thunderstorms with this. They're not really expected to be severe at all, but definitely want to be aware out here for some gusty winds, a line of thunderstorms, and even potentially some flooding rainfall. And the tropics continue to still be pretty active. Our one area of interest that we've been looking at the past couple of days now has a 90% chance of formation. It's almost guaranteed that we'll at least see something tropical form out of this tropical depression, tropical storm, maybe even a hurricane. But the most important thing is the track. It is expected to follow that trend that we've been seeing all year, where these storms kind of just loop up back out into the Atlantic, kind of being punched away by one of those cold fronts and high pressure systems coming off of the U.S. Then we do have this little area of interest down here in the Yucatan, only a 10% chance of formation. It's not really looking super likely that we'll get anything out of this, but it would just mean quite a bit of rain for some areas in the Gulf, like Mexico and the surrounding areas in the Yucatan region.